Hey everyone, welcome to the Slice Healthcare podcast. Super excited for today's episode. Ruby, pleasure having you here.
Such a pleasure to be here, Jared. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Let's dive right in. So, first off, although I say this like typically the guests we have, I say this is unlikely, but let's assume there's people listening that are like, who is Ruby? Right? So, who is Ruby? And then kind of lead that into why you're doing what you're doing, how you're maybe to a degree, how you don't have to go into
Yep.
the ins and outs.
Yep.
And then bare basic, what do you do? I love that Simon Sinek, like why, how, what. So let's follow
Yep.
that format.
Okay, perfect.
Off to you.
Love that. Well, thank you so much for the intro. So I'm Ruby. I'm the CEO of a company called MDisrupt. And I always think about people in terms of their superpowers. And my superpower has been in building, commercializing, and scaling health products for about 26 years. And I had the privilege of working for a number of pretty incredible companies such as Invitae, 23andMe, and many, many more after that. And I was living in Silicon Valley up until 3 years ago when I moved to Austin. And I had spent my career working with companies to scale their health products. And for me, how you scale a health product is a formula. You do this, you do this, you do this, and you scale. You skip a step or two, you fail. And it's as simple as that. And so I was in Silicon Valley very, very frustrated with the amount of dollars that were going into healthcare companies of really needed things, right? Things that could really change patient outcomes, but they were never seeing the light of day. And if you want to, statistic on that, there's 350,000 health tech and medical device companies in the universe today, and 75% of the medical device companies are going to fail, and 98% of the digital health companies are going to fail. And that was very frustrating to me. So I decided to go and consult for some of these companies, which I did. Consulted for 25 companies, and what I realized was that the ones that brought healthcare people into the companies early and often are the ones that had superpowers and were going to scale, and the ones that didn't were, were not. And so the market insight that I had to found MDisrupt was the future builders of healthcare come from outside of healthcare potentially. And how do we make sure that the healthcare insiders are at the table with them, building beside them? And so I founded MDisrupt, which is the health tech industry's premier health expert marketplace. And that's essentially who we are.
Probably one of the best. Here's what we do. Like the whole why, how, what on the show, honestly, because like
Right.
you know how sometimes you hear companies they say what they do and you're like, oh yeah, and you have no idea what they do after they say it. Like that is so clear cut. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
I thought you were going to say your key insight was working with these companies is that when banging your head off a desk, you should put a pillow there to soften the blow. But hey, yours was a lot better.
It's
Uh,
true because healthcare is so hard, right? Healthcare is so hard. And honestly, the only way to make it easier is to bring in the people who know it from the inside. That's the only way that makes it easier.
yeah, and you know what? It's hard to build out the right advisory teams. It's hard. Like so, I remember when I started my last company. We were focused on the credentialing space, right? And we did have some physicians that we brought in that as advisors that were definitely able to help. One was out of Humana, and then we had a few others. And when you do have that guidance, like these companies need a mix of insiders and outsiders. It's not a one size fits all,
It's
right?
not.
You can't. Um, how much of when you have these conversations though is like just helping adjust human behavior because
A lot.
I see it on both ends, right? One side sometimes thinks um, like you have a lot of physicians that they talk about like we need more physicians at the table running these, and we absolutely do.
Yep.
But then there's sometimes those people are like against any of the outsiders even working with them on certain things. If we don't have each side to push each other, right? So
Both.
like, what are you seeing?
So there's a couple of things. So firstly, when I think about healthcare experts, I think about it in four big buckets that are specific to healthcare: clinical expertise, commercial expertise, regulatory expertise, and reimbursement, right? So those are the four kind of big buckets of how do you actually make a healthcare company scale. And so one of the biggest things, and I love your insight there, is that there is a very big culture clash between building a scaling company quickly and how people practice medicine. So in Silicon Valley, where I lived, we were taught go fast and break things. And in healthcare, they take an oath to do no harm. And those two things are diametrically opposed. And so the way that we think about things at MDisrupt is if you have both sides at the table, right? The clinical side, the healthcare side, as well as the tech side and the scaling side, then you can go fast responsibly. And so our mantra at MDisrupt is go fast responsibly, have the right people at the table, have the insiders building alongside the innovators, and that is how you can build healthcare products that truly scale. And honestly, the bigger than scale is change patient outcomes for the better.
Speed is so important, but it is really interesting how a lot of investors stress, move fast, break things. But really, until you get to product market fit, I mean, look how many companies die because they run out of money because they move too fast. They broke a lot of things and now they have no money. And then the same people that told them to maybe move fast and break things, they're either going to bail them out or they're not. Right. So it is interesting. So, like, what is the fine line in that? And then, how let's come at it from both angles. How did you think that? I think a lot of healthcare investors got this, at least if they didn't a couple of years ago, they get it now, right? That it's
That's
a
right.
little bit
Well,
different.
yeah.
When you have these conversations though, how do you set expectations with all kind of stakeholders, and that some of the old advice for other industries can't work for healthcare, at least in healthcare's current state?
Move fast and break things does not work in healthcare, period. Right. And it doesn't work in healthcare because you're going to break the patients, right? These are people's lives at risk. So that's one of the first things. The second thing is the level of the bar of evidence that you need to get any kind of adoption in healthcare is much, much higher. You need to do studies at every step of the way, studies to get through regulatory, studies to convince physicians that your product works better than the standard of care, studies to engage payers that your outcomes are actually going to demonstrate an ROI for them, right? And so there is nothing fast about any of those processes. And so I think what we have seen over the last few years is investors who are experienced and seasoned in healthcare appreciate that, and they've become a lot more discerning about the companies that they invest in. They're looking for more evidence, they're looking for more outcomes, they're looking for more rigorous studies. And I've actually found that really refreshing from 2021, where everybody was just, and even before 2021, people were just throwing money at the problem indiscriminately and seeing all the failures. And then the other piece that I think is really important about healthcare specifically is healthcare is a business that moves at the speed of trust. And part of moving at the speed of trust is the human element, right? The human element. Healthcare is a very human experience. It's dealing with people when they're most vulnerable. And I think it's really important for companies, as new technologies such as AI come into the space at a rapid speed, it's really important for companies to realize that the human element of it is still the core of what healthcare is. And so again, it's I don't know if I've answered your question, but how do we get the balance of technology to speed up the boring tasks that just could be automated versus keeping the human element of trust, relationships, intact?
Interesting. Yeah, but like, when we go through these, like you said, like the move fast, break things doesn't work in healthcare.
Mhm.
I do like how well healthcare also like the industry learns from these things, right?
True.
We make the right. I've seen a lot of companies in recent years make some way better pivots than maybe in a couple years before that, right? Where they would just straight up shut down or something like that. And now you see all these companies that kind of moved into different areas and are making it work. Um, you work with a lot of companies. You see a lot of what works, what doesn't. Where do you see, like, we kind of hear, okay, you run out of money, co-founders don't get along. What are some of the maybe less known reasons you see companies have issues in this space?
That's a great question. So we At MDisrupt, we work with startups, scale ups, and enterprise. And so every single stage of company. And we see probably about 400 companies per year, roughly. And I think, to me, the difference between the companies that are going to make it versus the companies that don't is actually having healthcare people early and often in the process, right? And when I'm talking about healthcare people, again, I'm talking about clinicians, like medical, reimbursement, regulatory, and commercial. And it's when all, and technology, when all of those five things come together, that is the magic formula for scaling healthcare. And so the thing that I do see happen is the ones that give the healthcare experts a seat at the table and a voice in the process, meaning they're actively listening to them, they're actively engaging them, they're talking to them early on in the process. Those are the ones that have the superpowers. I'll give you an example. There was a company that we consulted for a few years ago, and they were building a genetic test for opioids, and their plan was to sell the test to orthopedic surgeons, and they were about to spend $5 million on a sales team to go sell to orthopedic surgeons. And I said, "Oh my goodness, can we? Have you ever spoken to an orthopedic surgeon?" And they said, "No." We said, "Okay, can we get some for you?" They said, "Yes." So we did some work with the orthopedic surgeons, and the orthopedic surgeon said, "We don't care about this problem. We don't have this problem. We don't understand this genetic stuff that you're talking about. But the people that do care about this is the pain management specialists." So that company, through that insight, was able to pivot their go to market into the right ICP, or ideal customer profile. And so that is kind of the impact that you can have if you engage the stakeholders early and often in the process.
Funny enough, my first job out of college was I was on a sales team for it was a recruiting firm, healthcare recruiting firm that would sell into all the different health systems and things like that. But I focused on anesthesia and like orthopedic, like
Oh, you
general and
did?
orthopedic surgery. Yeah. So it's
So you
if
know
you
that type of clients,
but
that
if
kind
you don't speak their language,
of exactly,
you're done. Like you will not, they won't work with you.
exactly right.
That's the case with a lot of things in healthcare, right? But specifically, these surgeons are very specific. Yeah. So it's so they're that is a major slip up for a company if they go to spend on their go to market, they spend all that money and then they're gonna what's crazy is they're gonna probably blame a lot of the salespeople in that situation, like you weren't able to sell it, but really they made the wrong decision of hiring all those people in the first place, right?
And targeting their market appropriately. But I
Yeah.
think you bring up a really good point, Jared, which is when you're selling into healthcare, it is a different language, and you do need to speak that language, and you do need to understand that the words that you're saying have very specific meaning to that audience. And then the other nuance there, I'm sorry. The other nuance there is that, if you're selling to clinicians, clinicians don't love dealing with salespeople. Clinicians love to learn from other clinicians, right? And so, again, talking about companies with superpowers, companies that have chief medical officers, and they use the chief medical officer as the voice of the company and the person who can present the data and the person that understands the clinical workflow. I'm sorry about my notifications. And the person that can understand the clinical workflow, that is a superpower.
Yeah, it's we had even at that recruiting firm, right? We had this awesome. They made the decision early on when they were selling. They were doing something called a transition service where, like, if someone got rid of like their whole hospital medicine program, we would like create something for. It was like a little bit different than the traditional recruiting model,
Mhm.
and it was honestly like did not expect to be in that at all because then I left and then went into kind of the credentialing tech side of things. But like they had a lot of success because they decided early on to hire a chief medical officer, which many
Exactly.
healthcare like recruiting firms did not do. And this guy was brilliant, and it would change the whole dynamic when he would go into a clinical like leadership conversation with the other physicians at that hospital, and they're speaking the same language. And all of a sudden, like if you probably brought someone in that wasn't a physician to go and talk with the other physicians there, that relationship probably didn't happen, right? And I think you're 100% right. There's so many also early stage startups I think that slip up where they don't make that key clinical like leadership hire advisor like that's not part of the team early enough, and then
Exactly.
it's no surprise when you kind of see them maybe falter after a while.
And what's really interesting about that is if you bring on the clinical folks early on, it will actually help you refine what you build, right? You're going to build something completely different than if you're thinking about it completely from the outside. You'll take things into account like privacy, security, clinical workflows, how they would deal with a specific patient in a specific way. These are things that are really, really important as we build products for, if the end user is going to be a clinician or a healthcare system. These are things we have to take into consideration early on.
And on the flip side, the companies that don't, they're not doomed, but they made it a little bit more difficult for themselves, right? Because like I'll give you an
Exactly.
example. I know someone that started basically an AI accounting product, and they decided to build it without like CPAs in the early days.
Oh,
So
interesting.
they're building it from an outsider perspective.
Yeah.
And then they decided to start working with CPAs to come in and look at it. And they had to change some things,
Yeah.
but they also opened the eyes of the CPA because, like we
Better
said, it
ways of
needs
doing it.
takes both sides.
That's exactly right.
So they're not doomed if they don't, but they're doomed if they never,
They're
right?
doomed to say never. And also, I think part of the problem is, healthcare. Sometimes I feel that we're an insider secret society and it's hard to penetrate and find these folks. And again, this is kind of why I founded MDisrupt. It was, how do we find the folks that love and support innovation and know the healthcare system and know the problems of it and are frustrated by the problems of it and want to actually be part of the solution? And how do we find a way to get those people to the companies on demand somewhat? Every other industry has an on demand platform. This is the on demand for healthcare experts. And the idea is, you might need a chief medical officer, but a chief medical officer might cost you 400 to 500K a year. You can't afford that as an early stage startup. But you know what? If you had that person half a day a week or a day a week, that can have a massive impact for you as you build and later on as you scale. And to your point, even bringing that person into meetings with you, with some of your customers, with some of your investors, provided you're listening to that person and taking their feedback, that person literally can be your superpower.
I love it. Ruby, what's next?
What's next? So much. AI is a big thing. Everybody wants to talk about AI, and everybody's an AI company. So that's something that we're all watching. And I think, where I've seen it have the most impact in the healthcare, with the healthcare stakeholders that I've spoken to, is with the AI scribe tools. I think they're really interesting and game changing because they free up a lot of the clinician time and they allow the clinician to have that much more human experience with their patients. So that's one of the areas I'm excited about. And then I can't do any interview ever without shouting out my favorite category, which is women's health. And women's health, I need to always make a plug for it because women's health gets less than 2% of the funding, yet we are 51% of the population. We make 80% of the healthcare decisions. And my friend Nassim says we birth 100% of the future. So if anyone thinks that that's a tiny market, they are wrong. And that is something that needs a lot more focus and a lot more attention.
I've never heard someone word it the last way, but so true. Yeah, and it's you want to talk about impact.
That's the impact. That's the spot.
I I like that phrase though. Like the 100% of the future.
Credit to my friend Nassim Sayani. She's the one who uses it, and I can't stop using it since she said it.
It's a cool phrase. It makes I mean it
Right?
obviously makes total sense, but
Yeah.
it kind of shapes everything because then you look at every company, every none of all of that stuff does not exist if women's health is not in a better place,
Space.
if we're not taking care of it.
And if you just want to think about it from the dollar perspective, which some people do, women make 80% of the healthcare spend decisions in any family.
That's yeah, my mom makes
You're right.
all of them. Yeah, so
I
it's
make all the decisions for my family. My sister makes all the decisions for my father and her family. And so, yeah,
oh yeah, that's also true. It's not just your like immediate, it's
exactly.
also if someone's parents and stuff are still, or even if they have an elderly relative that doesn't have much
Exactly.
support, right? Usually they take on that. Yeah, it's Wow, you just changed. That needs to be like. Is that on a wall anywhere? Someone needs to.
I know.
Some
You
women's
need to
health company.
interview Nassim, Jared. Interview Nassim. I'll introduce you to her, and she'll tell you more about those stats.
I feel like I recently met Nassim,
Hmm.
which I think at Health.
Yeah, she's at How Women Invest now.
Maybe I didn't.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I would love to interview her.
Yep.
You want to co-host something together sometime too? Like, let's do
I
it.
love that. And in fact, you know what we could also do, Jared? I have some of the most killer experts on my platform. Like you would be shocked who from healthcare is on the MDisrupt platform. C levels and VPs and all kinds of really interesting
Let's
people,
just do. You know what?
which is scary.
Let's do a big let's do a collaboration
I would love
content
that.
together,
Yes.
and I would love to make it even a live stream. Bring a bunch of people in.
Let's do it. I love that.
All right, let's do it. I'm down.
Let's do it. That's the plan. So everybody should watch out for that next.
And you better be there. No, awesome.
I will absolutely be there, and we'll bring you a whole bunch of people because, like I said, we have some of the superpowers of the industry in our network, and I would love for the world to hear their voices and their perspectives on healthcare.
I love it, Ruby. This has been lovely. Great chatting with you. Wishing you all the best of luck, and looking forward to this next conversation.
Me too. Thank you so much, Jared. You're a wonderful host.